public transportation is a really obvious example of that people take usually the same route every day and stop seeing the things that are actually there, or stop even trying to see them.
Well, I was curious because the two kids, they were, everybody else that I've been observing before, they had some sort of an item, a bag, or mostly phones or flowers or whatever, which they actually all use as a device of protection of their privacy, and some sort of a weapon to either place on the seat next to them, or like immediately going to the phone or checking something on a smartphone, whatever. And the two kids, they didn't have anything. They were sort of pure, and maybe that's why they kept on nestling with their hands.
They didn't have anything. They didn't have that sort of tool that we usually use. That really interests me, the kinds of signals people give off to, or tools people use to either deter other people from coming up to them, or
totally
act busy. Or
often I wonder if it was always like that, when there were no free newspapers and no smartphones, no mobile phones. It's actually a time I remember if it was so different. People were like looking out of the window more frequently or whatever. And I think people lost totally the ability to just be there. Even myself. For example, I totally stopped reading those newspapers for free, which are just like blocking my brain. And that's the thing that I did, like without thinking, grabbing one of those and like flipping it through, just hating myself reading them. And there I really had to stop and say like, never ever touch it again. And but there's still there's a huge temptation to grab your phone, and especially when you're online, which is a great thing in New York City, for example. That usually you don't have connections in the subway. People have their podcasts and have a coffee mug in one hand and the iPod on the other one. Generally in Zurich, there's a similar diversity, for example, compared to places like New York. There's a lot of people with different ethnic backgrounds and so on, but it doesn't really show. People don't really display, or you don't feel like each group is big enough or self-confident enough to sort of be there and show themselves. Everybody's so used to not to be seen and not to be acknowledged, and this is a huge difference. But usually it's like people with an immigrant background that still like kids playing, or old people talking a bit louder than normal. So maybe it's also that each person, I know how it feels like to live here, and each person I look at is already known to me in a way, know exactly how they live, how they are making their way through the day. On the other hand, it was quite striking that people in Zurich are totally aware about their appearance and about how they look like, how they sound like. From the very first moment when I spoke to them, they wanted to come down to the street and watch their apartment from the outside to check what you can see, something in other cities nobody would ever do.
right.
Maybe they came on the last day of the last night of the show. They came downstairs and they were like, "Oh, it looks beautiful," whatever. But they would never ever. And also they totally wanted to listen to the recordings and to the edit of the recordings to make sure that everything they say is ready for the magazine or whatever.
Okay.
And they were so much occupied by the thoughts how they would come over. that's usually the moment when this person in this apartment, and there's always one protagonist in each apartment.
Yep.
That I pick, like father or one of the kids or whatever, and they approach the window and they are like in a frame and they present themselves, which is a tough moment for them to just stand there and watch, or being watched. And the easiest thing is to explain that that's the moment when you actually can see the audience on the street and observe them.
Yeah, that for me is the nicest moment from the short clips that I see, because it's very much that turning it around, which I really like, that moment. And that really interests me just in general, because I'm working with performance, that when the gaze gets turned the other way, and how that makes people feel, and how it makes them react, and that's why in terms of this exercise on the tram, not that I want to make anyone uncomfortable, but to know that if you're watching other people, that it's also okay if they're watching you, and it's something that most people are very uncomfortable with, and that we look out the window, or we use our phone, or we read a book, or we listen to music, and these are cues to that, to me at least, and that I use sometimes myself. Don't come up to me, don't talk to me. But then of course there's people that don't accept that don't either recognize those cues or don't accept those cues. And
I was quite struck about all the items people carry around, and it's like you have a set of tools and weapons. You place your whatever money, headphones, phones all over the place. It's really like people are totally geared.
Yeah, for me, I see them as tools to protect yourself in many ways.
The person I was sitting next to in the beginning, and she made a gesture like to shrug me off.
Okay.
It was like to pull her sleeves, which was quite nasty. It was. But I also, with all this talk about urban space and like art in public spaces, I sometimes, for me, for example, I hardly make any difference between theater spaces and urban spaces in terms of performing interventions, whatever, because I think the artificiality of putting somebody on stage and having people sit in the dark and is something that is hardly readable anymore. It's something that is and I think every relationship between spectator and performer is based on similar principles, regardless of being on stage or in a public space. So